Hey everyone, it's Nicky P. I know it's been a long time since I've been in the strategy video streets, but I'm back. At the end of this month, I'm releasing a cash game course I've been working on for a really long time. I put a lot of work into it. It covers every format, a ton of different stack depths, all the weird spots you encounter in deep live cash games. I played a lot of cash throughout my career and a lot of live and online cash over the last few years, so I'm really excited to share it with you. I've got a little video to give you an idea of what it's all about. So in this video, we're going to cover a big pot where Doug runs a huge bluff on another player named Ginge Poker. I've never watched Ginge Poker play before, and I have really no idea what assumptions Doug has about him. But in the course coming up and the way I've been approaching poker in general recently over the last few years is really trying to not just read off the solver, not just think about equilibrium strategies, but really kind of figure out how do we want to play against the people we're playing against, right? That's what's important. Where do we make extra money? And I think that Doug does a pretty good job of that here because he takes a hand that I never would have considered bluffing with, makes a huge bluff, gets it through, wins a huge pot. I think they started about 150 BBs deep and they're all in by the river. So let's just kind of get into it and talk about how the solver would play the hand versus how Doug plays the hand, which is just better in my opinion. And that's kind of the idea of what we're working for here. Just where do we make extra money? Just get rid of this solver poker. I'm over it. So Doug opens it up here with the ace-10 suited from the low jack in a straddle game. Ginge Poker is going to shoot it up just 4x from the straddle with ace-king suited. This deep, I go a little bit bigger. The charts that I've made for my course go a little bit bigger, but live poker is all about adjusting, right? We can't solve for a million different sizes to figure out pre-flop. So got to adjust. Let's see, what do we really want to do pre-flop in these spots? And then we'll give you a little sneak peek at the charts here. We've got every spot 100, 200, 400 BBs deep. And you can see we've got straddle games too. Here, I'm going to pop up, it's 150 BB deep, so I'm going to pop up 100 straddle and kind of work off that. I'm working with a 5x, but Ginge 4x's, so then we'll kind of just talk about how do I adjust there. Down here, we've got every spot. RFI, defense, blind versus blind, how you play versus opens versus 3-bets. Super easy to navigate spreadsheet here, so I'll just go versus 3-bet, no ante. Find my straddle sheet, and then Doug's kind of MP here, but I think he's going to be playing more of a hijack range. Think he's got post-flop edge. He's going to be a little bit looser than the charts. So we'll move from hijack to low jack to kind of adjust here. And we'll take a look. So versus that 3-bet, if at first a bigger size, he's already supposed to be indifferent with the pocket pairs and some of the suited aces. You know, if you're used to ante games or just playing some looser ranges, you're not familiar with these folds. But when somebody's playing a really solid equilibrium strategy, no anti-poker and no anti-straddle poker, especially versus in early positions, is super tight. So not surprised to see this mixing a bunch of folds with pocket pairs. But once the size goes down, I think Doug's just pure calling all the pocket pairs as he probably should and more suited stuff. So that's just, we just want to use these charts as an idea. In terms of versus the open, what's Ginge doing from the straddle? So he faces what I said probably was going to be a little bit of a wider open than what we're used to seeing because Doug probably thinks he's got a pretty good edge here. So Ginge is going to have, this is an important part of this here. He's going to have, some suited aces. He's going to have the ace-10 suiteds in there and the suited Broadway is really aggressive. And this is where we're going to get to later on in the analysis here is just like, if your opponents don't play these equilibrium strategies pre-flop, which a lot do not, then things get really tight really fast. Post-flop, they end up with really tight ranges when they miss some of these suited Broadways. Some people are just a little bit more polar than this and miss linear stuff, and I think that's one of the assumptions probably Doug was working off of here. So in any case, yeah, this is what it's kind of supposed to look like. This is what I tossed in the solver, and we'll take a look at it after we look at the rest of the hand post-flop. But this is how the sheets work, and if you buy the course, you can expect to get all these charts, which is like over 5,000. They're nicely organized for you, and they give you a good baseline to work off of for all your different setups in the live games that you may play. So let's just get back to the action there. Now, Jack 7-7 here. Ginge pretty quickly spills out a B33, so 1/3 pot, and I think I'd rather see a check or big bet here. You're going to make more money with your range, especially if it's a tighter range than what we have at equilibrium, because you're just flooded with overpairs and not much else diluting your range. But a lot of guys like to play that small bet, up their frequency. It's not very expensive. It's a nice, easy strategy to implement. And then Doug calls, which I think he shouldn't have many raises at all, if any at all, even versus a small bet. And his hand, of course, always calls with those nut flush draws. So I think everyone's doing fine right now. Like I said, I'd like to see Ginge go big on the flop, make a little extra money with his range, but it doesn't really matter too much. And with his hand, the ace king off, he just gets to bet a lot on this flop. And then he does check very quickly on the turn. I think that's where the pre-flop stuff comes in terms of how often he has a jack X, because if he's not mixing in the ace jack off sometimes versus early, and he's not mixing in those king jack, queen jack suited as heavily as he should, he's pretty deficient for jack X, and it's a tough turn card for him. I would have expected on a double paired board when he's got a bunch of ace highs and some overpairs, a little bit of a more deliberate decision, but maybe he just knows his ranges so well, or maybe he's a fast player and he just decides to pretty much snap check. I'm not sure if Doug reads into that too much. As a live guy myself, I can't help but notice it. If I had played with him a bunch and had seen him take time in other spots when he did actually turn a boat, maybe I'd think something of it. But the fact that he snap checks here, I don't know what to make of it because I haven't played with him too much, but it is notable for sure. The other thing about Ginge's pre-flop range is that he should have some suited 10s, 9-10 suited, jack 10 suited, queen 10 and king 10, as well as ace 10. And I do think a lot of people just go ahead and see a flop first, a low jack there from the straddle. So if he doesn't have the 10s, it changes the hand a lot for Doug because it increases the likelihood that Ginge has something other than the queen 10, king 10 high flush draw on the turn. That is where he's going to draw a lot of his check raises from. And in addition to that, it probably just pushes Doug's hand into more of a check because Ginge is kind of more weighted towards overpairs and bigger ace highs. If Doug had something like ace 4, 5, 8, 9 at equilibrium, I would like to see him bet it and just get a fold from other ace highs that dominate him. You know, like all the ace highs still have to mix some folds here. It's a tough strategy. This is kind of where the hand gets pretty cool. Now Ginge wakes up with some pretty good computer poker here. He's looking at his suits. He's got 2 clubs. All of Doug's jacks have to be suited. So Ginge blocks ace jack of clubs, king jack of clubs. And that's really a lot of Doug's jack X here. And then if Doug did decide to get loose pre-flop, he still has the ace 7 blocker as well. So nice check raise here. I think this is like the number one check raise. Ginge seems pretty sharp here. I think it's a great play. And Doug has a tough decision, but he's got to continue with the ace of spades. He should be up against some worse flush draws in some cases. If Ginge does have the like 8-9 check raise or whatever, maybe some 5-6, 4-5, and maybe a random bluff with some king queen, but that's kind of getting a little bit low percentage chance to happen. In any case, yeah, great play from Ginge. I love it. Nice and aggressive, putting Doug in a tough spot after Doug bets half pot. And we get to the river. Queen of diamonds. Now, this is tough for both guys because now, and it's also a really good card for Ginge to pick up on the fact that now Doug doesn't have any of those club jack X that we talked about. And now he doesn't have queen jack of diamonds either. So Doug's range is kind of hurting for jack X. Ginge could put him to the test or he can check and make a decision. And he does check to Doug. Now Doug's probably thinking, what do I have for bluffs? What do I have for value? If I do get here on the river, I've got some low flush draws. I've got my other ace high flush draws with the lower ones, the 4 and the 5. But it's not too much because he went down a really aggressive line, right? Like he called the 3-bet, he called the flop. When check 2, he bet 50% pot on the turn, and then he called a check raise. So the ranges get pretty tight. In these tight range spots in no ante poker, you've got to bluff with some really strong stuff. And now this is where the hand is pretty interesting to take a look at river decisions on the solver as Doug, because if you just look at an output with the ranges that we kind of know are close to what players are doing, if they're playing great with their well-studied pre-flop charts, Ginge is supposed to have some queen 10 of spades, king 10 of spades, and hands like that. So then that would make, when Doug's going all in on the river, trying to make hands fold, he's going to be targeting those 10x flush draws and some ace highs, right? So having an ace in your hand and a 10 and both of them being spades makes this maybe likely one of the worst hands to bluff in solver world, in computer land. But if Doug thinks that Ginge doesn't have those hands pre-flop, and then he's still capable of having this type of bluff on the turn, and then just making a bunch of river folds, and potentially even having some overpairs in this line and making river folds, then Doug's hand just turns into a bluff, and it's great, and it goes from being a negative EV play to making extra money. So let's take a look at it and kind of see what these concepts, what shifting these ranges around does. We only use the sizes that the guys use in game, so I've just got them only allowed to bet 33 on the flop, and then only allowing Doug to bet 50, because we don't want to go down some branch of the tree that doesn't really exist. So, a lot of betting on the flop. Even when you have all these bluffs that we talked about, people probably are much tighter than this pre-flop. It's just hard to mix all this bluffing, and I think in general people tend to be more polarized. So you can see it's pretty heavy in king jack, queen jack, queen 10, king 10, ace 10 suited. Those are the hands in question here that kind of are the crux of the river decision for Doug. But in any case, no raises on the flop. Like we said, we've already gone over this stuff. And then turn. Ginge still gets to keep barreling. Like, he does have a lot of those jacks in the 3-betting range, and he even has ace jack off. And then his hand just mixes, of course, with his kickers. With his suits, he does have the best hand to bluff with, the best ace king to bluff with. The clubs are just really good. When check 2, we only let Doug be 50. I do think that I would prefer mixing a lot of smaller betting as well, so that you can work in these pocket pairs at a higher frequency. And also, I just don't think that the population punishes you enough for making the small value protection bets. People are a little bit inelastic versus that kind of size, and sometimes make some tight folds versus too small versus size that's too small for them to fold to. But in any case, first B50, we can see Ginge really, he has some of these check raises. He prefers the diamonds, but I mean, not going to give the guy a hard time for finding a really hard play. I kind of like it, and every ace king, a lot of the ace king offs kind of do it at some frequency. So good stuff from him, knowing how to put somebody in a tough spot here. He does make that raise, which is like a 40% pot raise. And we can see Doug's got the pure call. So this is kind of not realistic, right? Like, it's just kind of how the computer plays against itself. But I just want to compare, because I do, over the last few years, you do see a lot of stuff like, oh, the solver says this, the computer does that. And the idea of this, of when you're playing live cash, is just kind of put in ranges and change things around the way that you think your opponents are playing. Of course, that's the most important. So we get to the river. Ginge does have, he gets to continue to bluff with those ace kings a bunch. He doesn't want to bluff with that flush draw, like we said. So that's a big part of the hand here, is that he was pure check raising the king 10 of spades when he had it, the queen 10 of spades when he had it. He's check calling the ace 10 of spades when he had it. So having spades here and having an ace when we look at the river strat. Now when we call, of course, he wants us to have a missed flush draw, right? So all of his give ups are pure give up ace king of spades, gives up king 10, queen 10, and then he checks a lot of those ace highs, right? When he checks, we really got, if we look at the EVs of our plays, we can see, this is not to pick on Doug because I do think he did well, but we can see there's only one hand that's going all in the range that is losing chips, and it's 6,300 chips, so 30 big blinds, 15 straddles, however you want to call it. But that's because when we put them all in, we're getting all the hands that we're getting folds from, we block. So the ace of spades are the hands in this range that he folds. King 10 of spades, queen 10 of spades, right? Ace highs. So do we want to just look at this and say Doug made a bad bluff? No, because if you pop up another solve where we just give a little bit, we keep some bluffs in pre-flop, but it's just that more polar range that a lot of opponents use. And again, I don't know if this is Doug's read. I'm assuming it was. Even leaving in the low suited aces, which is sometimes generous for some players, leaving in some king queen off and stuff like that, and then just leaving in the jacks, but at a lower frequency, just quarter of the time, and then taking out ace jack off because it was already low frequency, and I don't think it's that realistic. Once we just give it a little more polar range, it still leaves the low suited stuff in. Then we can see similar flop strats, of course, although he doesn't really have to check at all now because he's so tight, which is, like I said, like he just doesn't have anything diluting his range, and he's got a lot of overpairs proportionally here. Now, no raises again. Of course, the tighter range wouldn't make raises. And then Jack X turn. Also, these turn strats, for the same reason, weren't betting ace 10 suited too often, but then if you lower the check raise frequency on the turn, maybe if they're not check raising some of their overpairs as they should, or they're folding a little bit too much ace high, then the ace 10 suited can work in there. But generally speaking, it would have been a check just because it's right in the between zone where you bet ace 10, you get called by ace queen, and then the ace 9 or whatever the other aces folds. So your ace 10 is kind of like your best one that's in between your opponent's folds and then it continues. But again, if you're going to set your opponent up for a big river bluff where he's going to overfold, or where you know that he doesn't have certain combos, as many combos of Jack X here, like Doug, I assume that was his thought process, then you can start betting. And like I said, you just don't get punished too often. Although I would say the guy that makes this check raises seems like a bit of a punisher, which, give you credit, Ginge, it's a pretty sweet play. But so he makes check raise. Now we continue again. We get the same river. All the same blocker stuff is going on. And then Ginge checks it over. And now we have a bluff that is actually worth money. So it's a really big lesson in looking at an output that you just throw ranges into thoughtlessly and then just saying like, oh, that was a bad bluff. Look at all the bad removal and stuff. But if you change the guy's range out of position a little bit, if you tinker with post flop, given different assumptions, little changes and little shifts in strategies can make huge differences. I just wanted to point that out because I thought this was an awesome hand by both guys, and maybe it could have been criticized, or maybe the combo use could have looked wrong. But the reality is, when you're playing live cash, it's the old cliche, you're playing against the man, you're doing what you think is right versus those ranges, and that's what the new course is all about. I do teach a lot of equilibrium strategy because without the equilibrium, how can we know how to deviate? But from there is where all the deviations come, where you make the extra money. So keep your eyes out for future promotional vids coming up over the next few weeks, leading up to the release of this course at the end of the month. And we will talk to you soon. Thank you.